Trump that they're threatening to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming across the border into the U.S. and Mexico. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico.
I'll see your shitty actions, Trump, and raise you getting real racist with it. Yes, Dave.
Donald Trump just threatened a 25% tariff.
Tariff. The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary.
We're going to tariff the hell out of them.
I am a tariff man! On all goods coming into the United States from Canada and Mexico. That would raise the price on food, medicine, cars, oil, lumber, concrete. And Trump says it would be a day one priority after his inauguration.
It's a bit of, rinse, wash, repeat, and that cycle going on again.
Even more of a negative downward pressure on U.S. economic growth.
Experts are warning this could eventually impact our wallets.
Yeah, this could directly impact our wallets.
But there's one big problem when it comes to interpreting what Donald Trump is proposing here.
How much will the tariffs affect the price of the Sam Cedar body pillows? I think we can have an exemption. We could probably find a provision. I'll have to canvass, obviously, people here in Canada to make sure that the Prime Minister understands the importance of the Sam Cedar body pillow. He might not approve of all sizes. Those who want the full life-sized Sam, obviously our most popular item for very self-evident reasons, but that one might be a little bit more difficult just because of the costs.
There's the policy, and then there's the posturing. And it's not easy to tell which of the two is real. Let's go through it.
The consequences are going to be devastating for Canada. The U.S. is our largest trading partner. Roughly 70% of the totality of our trade is with the United States.
A 25% tariff is effective.
So just to be clear, by the way, Donald Trump, he said that the whole reason he's doing this to Mexico and Canada is because we're exporting crime and exporting drugs and all this other stuff. And unfortunately, that whole scenario, yeah, it's a bullshit. It's bullshit. I looked it up. So Canada does not export a shit ton of fentanyl to the United States. It's not the key manufacturing center for fentanyl. We do have some precursor ingredients that come in from China. China did a huge crackdown on fentanyl manufacturing, but they do still manufacture the precursor ingredients, and then that stuff is usually shipped over to Mexico, where the Sinaloa cartel, as well as like a couple others, are kind of the key cornerstones of manufacturing those precursor ingredients into fentanyl, which is primarily consumed in the US of A. Canada doesn't do the fentanyl manufacturing. What it does do is MDMA. We produce a lot of MDMA, but that's not what he was really talking about. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of problem with all the Molly, but we do also grow a lot of pot. So we export the weed sometimes to the U.S.
Clean up your room.
In terms of danger, criminals, all that shit that he's talking about, it's the exact opposite. Canada gets 70% of its legal firearms from the United States because the U.S., y'all, are huge gun manufacturers. You just love guns, and you have a lot of guns, and so that's why it would make sense that is one of the key arms manufacturers. Actually, no, sorry, you are the largest arms manufacturer in the world. As the largest arms manufacturer in the world, you make a lot of weapons, you have a lot of guns, and so when it comes to illegal guns in this country, they come from America. Same thing with Mexico. When it comes to Mexican illegal firearms, apparently 70% of them come from America, which makes sense because America has all these guns, so it's just like one of those things. But like, there's no one on the other side here basically trying to say to the U.S., we're going to impose a tariff on y'all, on everything, unless you reduce the amount of illegal guns coming into Canada. Because solving that problem would be so complex, multifaceted, and absurd that it's just like going to be a disaster across the board. That's what's being asked in the opposite direction. It's basically Canada, Mexico. We want to end the fentanyl crisis here in the U.S. And so to do that, we're going to demand that you stop creating all of these drugs and all of these drug dealers and sending them into the U.S., which is like, even if you were capable of doing that, even if you were capable of completely eliminating the ability to manufacture and sell and export and import drugs to America, tariffs have nothing to do with this. absolutely nothing. Like, it's so absurd. It's a way of flexing and basically trying to apply economic pressure or economic warfare to two individual countries who happen to be your largest trading partners for $1 trillion worth of trade, I think, a year. And in doing that, like, it's going to be absolutely ridiculous. Like, you can't strong arm another country into solving the drug crisis or the fentanyl crisis. It's so, like, part of me is like, on some level, there's got to be someone thinking whether or not this is true or wondering that, like, sitting back and being like, oh, well, you know, how do we solve this? What do we do? We got this crisis. And apparently Trump is saying that we have to solve it. And, well, unfortunately, the politicians in Canada, some of them are buying into it, like straight up just saying that, like,
would be to just
this is Marjorie Taylor Greene of Canada, Danielle Smith. She's the premier of Alberta.
start hiring a border patrol so that we can guarantee that we aren't having a free flow of drugs and illegal migrants across the border. We have to make sure that we're addressing the areas of Chinese using us as a backdoor to get into the United States and close those loopholes. It sounds like we've done a better job than Mexico, so I think we can make that case. And we've got to see the Prime Minister chart a pathway to meeting our defense targets, because if we cannot...
Craven, cowardly, what the fuck is wrong with you? Immediately. There's so much Canadian MAGA. It's so cringe. The leader of the Conservative Party in BC said the same thing. He's like, well, Trump has made it very clear. We have a problem and we have to do what he says. And we have to immediately do everything in our power to get rid of all the drugs and to get rid of all the illegals that we're bringing into the United States. And I was like, what? Wait, sorry. You're acknowledging this absurdity, this clown choosery? You're actually saying right now that, like, oh, well, yeah, you know, maybe he's got a point. Maybe this made-up thing that's going to solve a multifaceted problem of addiction, by the way. Like, if Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, came forward and was like, hey, by the way, the opioid crisis was started in large part due to corporations in the U.S., including Purdue Pharma. These corporations pushed Oxycontin on doctors, who then sold them to their patients, who then got a lot of people addicted to opioids. When they stopped taking the Oxycontin, they discovered they want to keep taking the Oxycontin. At that point, this problem continued to spread, and then once it combined with the fentanyl crisis, cheap, very powerful, you know, synthetic opioids, we find ourselves in the disaster we are in today. Solving this is going to be very difficult, but you know what? Tariffs. If I just impose a 30, 40, 50, 60% tariff on all goods going in from America to Canada, well, then at that point, I can force him. I can be like, solve the thing. Flip the switch. Just make it better. I want you to fix my problem, please. It's easy, right? Like, hey, Canada, solve the fentanyl crisis.
Solve those things. All of the lobbying in the world is going to come for naught. We've got to address the issues that have been identified as pressure points and alleviate them.
Do you think, though, that the way in which it's being characterized by Donald Trump is justified? And I ask because I understand the pushback on defense targets, but there is one that has been set of 2032. If you look in a relative sense at migration and issues at the border, it is a tiny fraction, like 1% of what's happening at the Mexican border. Surely you
Also, by the way, this is like as close as you'll get to good journalism on like mainstream Canadian television, because it's like that question is very valid, right? Where it's like, do you think this is justified considering everything? Like, at the end of the day, it makes no sense, but it's still done so Canadian and friendly like, you know, this like Mehdi Hassan would have been way more intense if he was trying to do this exact same like interview, right? Whereas at this point, it's just kind of like, oh, well, what you think then, Derry? Oh, yeah, I understand the concern, and obviously we don't want to be hosers, but like, you know, what about the fact that only about 1% of the fentanyl comes into the U.S. from Canada? Then, you know, and like, it's true. Why are you buying into this? What's wrong with you?
When you know, you wouldn't be insinuating that Donald Trump is justified in doing this, are you?
Well, just saying we're not as bad as the other guys is not going to fly in this case. What I understand is that we've seen a doubling of the number of interactions at the border from people coming across, up to 200,000 a year now. That's significant. And when you're talking about a drug crisis that is not only hitting us but also hitting the Americans, they want to stop that flow of drugs. When you see that increasingly the open border policy.
So Canadian MAGA exists. It's cringe and it's a real problem. And honestly, it's beyond, pathetic to see this shit still happening. I can show you Mr. John Rustad. President Donald J. Trump is threatening tariffs unless Canada secures our border to stop killer drugs and illegal immigrants from entering USA through Canada. Those are his demands. It's time to stop the drugs, secure our southern border, and win the trade negotiations. This is so sad. It's so unbelievably pathetic. We're a different country, technically. I know we're a vassal state of the U.S. and sometimes England, all hail the king. But how are you responding to this with just like, we got to do it? She says that we're the cause of the illegals and the drugs. We did no choice.
Effectively a 25% tax on whatever comes into the United States based on how expensive that thing is. So if a company's shipping...
And by the way, Americans, I know a lot of people are like, well, you get what you paid for, MAGA, enjoy. And it's like, all of you who didn't pay for it, first off, are going to get fucked. Right? When there's going to be a tariff war, which there is, like Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, who's awesome, by the way, compared to fucking the leaders of Canada, has just straight up said, like, this is bullshit. 70% of illegal firearms in this country, in Mexico, arrive from you, and we're not imposing tariffs. If you impose tariffs on us, we're going to impose tariffs on you. And in the case of Canada, that would have been an amazing thing to echo, which probably will happen in the long term because they're eventually going to have to do something. But you get so many supplies from us. You get lumber, oil, water, like fresh water, like all these kind of things. These are not manufactured products, not end-to-end products where at the end of the day, like these are products that massive corporations in the US, they're going to buy up raw supplies, which they do from us, and then they're going to manufacture products out of those raw supplies. They're going to have to increase the cost of their products. It's going to increase everything. The consumer is the one who's going to be paying the price. Like, I keep trying to explain this in terms of like the EVs, because China apparently makes incredible electric cars. They're amazing. And because they're so good, they're so cheap, they're so efficient, they're very long lasting, which are three things that would definitely damage the electric automobile industry in North America. Well, then it makes sense why someone is going to be like, we're going to impose 100% tariffs. I don't agree with it. I don't think you should. I think you should honestly just allow us to get flooded with good electric vehicles from China. But either way, I can understand the rationale behind saying, I have to impose a tariff on this, because if I don't, our local industry will be destroyed. That at least on paper makes sense. There's a use of a tariff to be like, oh, well, this is not simply because we specifically hate China. It's because they're better at us than this, and we can't compete. So to preserve the local automotive industry, I'm unfortunately, so we don't get flooded with these cheap cars, going to have to increase the price of the car for the consumer so that they will be comparable to the local manufactured vehicle. That on paper makes sense. I don't agree with it. I would oppose it as I did, but like either way, that makes sense. For a universal blanket tariff on all things, aka anything that is going to come in from Canada or Mexico to the US of A is going to have a 25% tariff imposed upon it, meaning that every single company that imports vast amounts of, say, supplies, lumber, for example, and they manufacture things with that lumber, they're going to have to increase the cost and pass that off to the consumer for their product. Because, yes, you pay more for the thing, you're going to have to then pay more for the product. And so the loser of all this is obviously going to be humans. It's going to be consumers, the working class, and eventually it could crash the global economy, which unfortunately is the last piece of the puzzle that Trump needs for the full-blown fascism. He needs a complete economic collapse. I'm not a conspiracy theorist that thinks he's doing this intentionally. I think he's stupid. But I think he wants to just strong-arm the other countries around him and flex. And in doing so, a lot of Republicans and MAGA and the cultists have bought into this idea that he can do this and it's going to be so strong and powerful. And like, yeah, suck it, Canadian commies. Suck it, Mexico. commies. We're imposing tariffs on you until you solve our fentanyl crisis. Like, Jesus, you should also look within. You should probably be looking at the fact that so many Americans are addicted to fentanyl, and that's a huge problem. And there's a lot of things that you need to do in order to address the fentanyl crisis, as we have to do a lot of things in our country to address the fentanyl crisis, as Mexico has to do a lot of things to address the war on drugs, which is imposed upon them by the United States. Again, this is not going to solve any of this kind of shit.
In a $40,000 car, now it's a $50,000 car. The company pays the tax. That makes the vehicle more expensive for the consumer, and the US government pockets the difference.
The basic rule of supply is that if the price goes up, I want to produce more of this stuff. If the price goes down, I want to produce less. It means I need less workers, and so people start losing their jobs.
And this is a big problem for a country like Canada, because last year it exported almost $600 billion worth of goods to the United States. That's more than 3/4 of all of Canada's exports. And Canada's trade relationship with the US is about 2/3 of this country's GDP. The top 5 exports: energy, that's mainly crude oil, and cars. And note, that includes car parts. The auto industry is a really good example of how damaging tariffs can be for those who have to pay them. Because cars aren't just built in one country. The engine might be built in one place, the transmission in another. Then they're assembled in yet another place. And all of these components can cross national borders multiple times before they magically turn into a car. A tariff charges a tax.
Wait, what's the magic? Why don't you explain the magic part? I want to know the magic part.
Every time they do.
The average car crosses the border 7 or 8 times, 8, 9 times over the course of its production, trying to unwind.
I thought it was like 2. I didn't know it was 7 or 8. I understand, yes, especially with complex manufacturing, it usually does have to do things like that, where it keeps going back and forth between plants and automotive industries. I didn't know it was that many times. This is going to be such a disaster. Can you imagine having to pay a tariff levy each time? It's like, okay, so those, wheels initially have been manufactured and they've been turned and they've been added with rims and all that kind of stuff. And that's been added to a frame. We now have to ship that to Canada. Canada has done a retaliatory tariff on us. So that's going to, increase the cost of importing it. Okay. They've now added, the outside, the shell, they've added the engine. They're now going to have to ship it back to you because now they're going to have to add new things like glass and then windshield wipers. And you do that 7 times in a row, 7 tariff levies. Holy shit. Yeah, the cost, it's going to be just completely nonsensical. This is why I'm like, because he's fucking with the bag here, Trump, there's going to be a lot of pressure from corporations to be like, fuck you. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is absolute bullshit, That I think will apply more pressure than any spineless Democrat. Like, you're not going to see. I know Congress. I was watching the Legal Eagle video. Apparently, Congress can impose, measures upon tariffs. But then he was using some old timey Cold War provision to get around that last time. So, and also the Democrats literally have no spine. They're just gelatinous blobs of goo. So that's not really something I think that they're going to put up a fight for. They're going to be like, oh no, we just got to bide our time. And 2028 is when we'll make a comeback by doing nothing but changing and going further to the right in perpetuity.
In that, in a way that doesn't hurt American consumers, is an incredibly difficult task. I spoke to one trade analyst in the United States who said, tinkering even a little bit with the fundamentals of that trade organization is like doing surgery without anesthesia.
And consider how some parts manufacturers have plants on both sides of the Canada-US border, and many ship parts between locations constantly. A company like that would have to completely rethink its supply chain, or else face 25% higher costs, sometimes multiple times for the same product.
What this could end up doing is might be bizarre, but you might see a lot of new deals happening where all of a sudden Canada and Mexico start looking elsewhere and, start looking for other markets to be able to, start buying up vast amounts of their supplies, including like fresh water. I don't understand it. I don't know whether or not you'd be able to export fresh water to another location. It makes sense that it goes right to the US. But crude oil, I mean, China's going to want that crude oil. There's lots of countries that are going to want that crude oil, right? And is that going to open up more international trade with other parts of the world? Well, at the same time, the United States is like, oh, well, you know, fine, we'll make our own oil then. And then it's going to be a house of cards from this entire concept to execution.
You're a manufacturer.
We received the biggest threat we've ever received from our closest friends and ally.
He's a Trump supporter and has been for a while, by the way. The fact that now he's kind of like, what the fuck? Trump bad? No one is allowed to act surprised or do Trump bad, especially politicians at the highest levels at this point in history, okay? Not only has there already been 4 years of Donald Trump, but there's also been, the attempted coup, the insurrection, the stealing of the election, the nonstop, like, fucking bloviating, the criminal charges, the rapes. Like, the list is so endless to suddenly be like, it's a surprise that apparently a man who is orange is bad. And it's like, yeah, he is. He's quite bad.
President-elect Trump, that they're threatening to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming across the border into the U.S. and Mexico. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico.
I'll see your shitty actions, Trump, and raise you getting real racist with it. Yeah, I keep thinking of that Ta-Nehisi Coates fucking meme where it's like, whoa, that was really racist. That was really, really racist. What I find most insulting about this is not the fact that it could crash the global economy, but that he compared us to Mexico. Let me tell you, Canada's no Mexico. That's where you're going with this? You're going to fight shitty policy and racism with shitty policy and racism, then. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. Well, hey, Canada's trash. Okay, I think that's what this is all showing you. We have a combination essentially right now of a whole bunch of premiers of provinces who are all just like running in circles. The premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, is essentially a separatist who wants to join America and has been trying to do so for some time now, and as part of the whole not Blexit, it's called something even cringier, but she's essentially trying to make Alberta its own sovereign nation or join the US, which clown shoes. And she is someone who will oftentimes shit all over the federal government until something like this happens, and now she's like, we have to do what Trump says. We have to. If we don't do what Trump says, he'll punish us, and we're bad. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that is not really going to happen, because it's actually mathematically impossible for us to solve the fentanyl crisis in the US. It's just, not only do we not produce the fentanyl that they're consuming, or at least the vast majority of it, but also it's not going to be able to be something that we can solve domestically in the United States because we're a different country. So clown shoes don't do what he wants in terms of like, yes, Trump right, Trump is correct, we have to do what he says kind of shit. But now apparently she's begging Justin Trudeau for help, the prime minister, and being like, help me, federal government. Once again,
we do approximately, just Ontario alone, $500 billion of two-way trade. I found his comments unfair. I found him insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. Spent a lot of time in the US.
I was honestly hoping that this would have been a moment, especially after seeing what happened in Mexico, watching Claudia Sheinbaum come forward and just fucking wreck Trump, full middle fingers blasting coming out of the gates and being like, yeah, as the only adult in the room, here's the rub. The reality is that the majority of our illegal weapons come from your country. The synthetic drug problem was not caused by us, and you are the consumers of the synthetic drugs. So if you want to cause both a global economic crash and destroy your own economy and destroy the ability for fucking consumers in your country to buy goods, go ahead, we'll retaliate. That's how it's done. Very, very well said. Thank you. Thank you for being the only adult in the room. Meanwhile, the premiers of the provinces of Canada are all over the map. In some directions, we have some clowns who are just straight up like, well, Trump must be right. He's made very clear and concise terms. We are the creators of the fentanyl and the creators of the illegal immigrants. And we brought the illegal immigrants. And I saw the illegal immigrants. And it smiled at me. And I was scared. And we have to do what he says. If we don't do what he says, then the tariffs are coming. Okay. That was very embarrassing. Okay, Doug Ford, what do you got? Mexico sucks. Anything else? I'm deeply hurt. It hurts me. I'm hurt. I got stabbed in the back by a family member. I love Trump. I did everything for him. I said Orange Man good. And now it turns out the Orange Man is bad.
Political amplification of the kind of narrative that is directly opposed to that.
You claim that Canadians are just naive and they've been tricked by what you call disinformation into opposing this tax on their heat, housing, food, and fuel. But Canadians are not stupid, Justin. They oppose the tax because they see its price at the grocery store, where food has gone up 36% faster here in Canada than in the United States, a phenomenon that incidentally coincided with the application of your tax. They also know that the parliamentary budget officer...
It's just also cringe. And what's with the walking towards the camera? It's like Aaron Sorkin was chugging turpentine or some shit. And then in addition to that, like, I completely agree in the principle that we shouldn't be passing the cost of climate change directly on to consumers exclusively, which a lot of policies related to, say, things like carbon taxes can. But it's not as if he's going to replace it with anything. Like, it's not the necessary step. The necessary step that, like, the scientists are telling us is that we need to rein in our use of fossil fuels and stop just exacerbating the problem by continuing to consume them all under this capitalist hellscape. So if you were going to, say, nationalize the oil and gas industry again, if you are going to impose the cost of the damages from CO2 on oil and energy sectors and companies, that would be good. That'd be great, actually. Do that instead of, passing it on to consumers. But that's not it. It's just like, I'm just going to get rid of it. We're going to axe the tax. We're going to axe the tax and make the groceries a little more affordable. And everyday Canadians will realize that. And I'm slightly more swole now, so I'm a man. Like, no.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This independent series is made entirely possible thanks to our patrons. It was produced by Anna Loves Riley, Arian McCarthy, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Bohem, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demmel, and Words Greenwood. Not to mention all the other patrons we now see on screen. We couldn't have done this show without you. If you can help support the show, please check out patreon.com/the Serfs to unlock bonus secret episodes as well as get the content before anyone else.